This episode is brought to you by CVS. Whether it's starting the day with a vitamin or ending it with a skin routine, CVS is here to help you celebrate your wellness wins and save big. Discover low prices on wellness products from brands like Listerine, ZzzQuil, Nature's Bounty, Colgate, Neutrogena, and Nature Made. Plus, get $10 extra bucks rewards when you spend $30. Celebrate every wellness win with CVS. Visit cvs.com/wellnesswins for details.
As we turn the page to 2023, we decided to look back at some of the biggest education stories of 2022. I'm Andrew Thien, and this is Beat Check with the Oregonian. Up next, Rose Wong, Julia Silverman, and Sami Edge. Rose covers early childhood education for the Oregonian and Oregon Live, Julia covers primary education, and Sami covers higher ed. We talked about the biggest issues and stories from their various beats last year, how the pandemic continues to affect students, what they're interested in covering in 2023, and much more. Here's our conversation. Rose, Julia, and Sami, thanks so much for taking time to talk today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Before I hit record, I mentioned this to Sami and Rose. I'm just, as a reader, as an Oregonian, as a parent, it's so great to be able to have the whole continuum of education covered. We've got early childhood, we've got primary, and we've got higher ed. So I'm just super psyched to read your stuff and excited to see what's coming in 2023. So we thought it'd be worth doing an education roundtable to look, back at 2022 and ahead to 2023 and kind of the big issues and stories on your various beats. So Rose, let's start with you and the youngest. You have been very busy in recent weeks covering all sorts of important issues in early childhood education. But kind of when you look back, what sticks out to you as the big stories of the year?
For sure. So two big programs I'm tracking are Preschool Promise and Preschool for All. Preschool for All in 2020, Multnomah County voters passed a measure to basically get every child into free preschool in the next 10 years. So part of my job and part of the reason why I was hired is to ensure that we meet that goal and smaller goals that we set to get there. And Preschool Promise is our statewide tuition-free preschool program for children and families who are at or below 200% of the federal poverty line. The Oregon Early Learning Division had promised to fund nearly 6,400 preschool slots this year, but due to understaffing at the state agency and preschools, thousands of kids who are supposed to have started school hadn't. So I have been doing and will continue to do is ensure that the state is keeping families and taxpayers informed about how this program is going and whether we are giving children the high quality early education that this program says it's committed to.
Yeah, obviously any new initiative, especially one of that size, is going to have some rocky issues, but given the importance to working families across the state or in the metro area, obviously the bar for scrutiny is even higher.
For sure. And one story, probably my favorite story that I have done in this beat is about Yoncalla preschool. It's a thriving preschool in a very small rural town 2 hours south of Portland. The school takes early education and social emotional learning really seriously. When I was there, I was really impressed with how the teacher led conversations about conflict resolution, emotional regulation, and grief, things that many adults still struggle with because we have
Yes.
Not had these conversations when we were children. But what's interesting is when the idea of starting a preschool was first pitched at the town in 2012, parents didn't want it. And it took some years for that public opinion to change. So the story is about this journey of going from a town not wanting a public preschool to having this thriving school that is that has expanded from 1 to 2 classrooms. Now it's going to have 3 classrooms in its own building next year.
It's a great story, and we'll make sure to share it in the episode notes so people who missed it can catch up. And let's move on up the age range to Julia. Julia, welcome to the Oregonian, by the way. We are so excited to have you covering this beat. So you're new to the O, but you are not new to covering education. You've already hit the ground running with some really interesting reads, but what jumped out to you in 2022 of kind of the big issues and stories?
Well, thank you so much for the welcome. The reason that I wanted, one of the many reasons maybe that I wanted to take this job, aside from the chance to work with such a talented team of colleagues, was that I'm really interested in charting the aftermath of the pandemic, its effect on kids, and what school districts and the state are doing about it. That does not mean that I'm interested in relitigating in the pages of the Oregonian whether or not schools should have opened sooner. We can't change the past.
Right.
And it's indisputable, no matter what side of that debate that you were on, that a year and change of school buildings being open only on a very limited basis took a real toll on kids. And, that's true if you were a kindergartner or true if you're a high schooler. So I really see my focus and goal in the next year as tracking what that has meant for kids. And so far, some of the stories I've focused on have been on strategies that the state could or should be using to help kids, whether that's high dose tutoring, to catch kids up who are behind, or I'm working on a story right now about math and sort of, like, should you double dose on math? Do you need a extended summer learning program that's focused solely on math? Academics are one piece of it. And then another question is just about behavior stuff and sort of like the culture of schools. And they're both equally tricky and weighty and complicated. So, and a third thing I would say I'm looking forward to in 2023 is following the money. Oregon has, like every other state, Oregon got a giant bucket of money from the federal government for pandemic relief in schools. Amazingly, the feds only required that 20% of that be used for academic purposes. It doesn't seem like very much to me.
No.
Although the state will tell you that actually 36% or so of that money so far is being used for academic purposes. Still not so much. So I'm interested in tracking how that money is being spent. And more broadly, and maybe beyond the pandemic, I'm interested in the concept of Oregon and local control. There's 197 different school districts in Oregon, and each of them is their own little fiefdom. Yeah. And every school district makes their own decision about how they teach kids to read, or, what kind of electives are offered. And I wonder about, how easy that makes it to put best practices in place. Oh, and I have one more. I'm interested in school board elections. I think they're going to be pretty hot come May.
Yeah, no, as you were talking there, it just kind of brought to mind, obviously, the Newburgh School District, and the school board was in the news a lot. I think that was this year. I think that was 2022. Sorry, by the time people hear this, it's going to be 2023, but time flies. All right, let's move on to the college kids. Sami, you have very interesting beats. So much going on there. These are kids who lived through the pandemic, a lot of them in the high school world that Julia just described. And now they're in college. What were the big issues that you followed in 2022?
Yeah, I will say that funding is always a huge topic at the higher ed level in particular. And this year, funding and enrollment really stood out to me. Particularly, I'm trying to focus as much as I can on community colleges, and they've had some really steep enrollment losses in Oregon, and that has raised some big funding questions for them. What do we do when federal money runs out? Are we going to have to make big cuts? And will enrollment come back if we have a recession down the line, right? So a lot of big unanswered questions. So I have tried to follow along with schools as they're grappling with those issues. I think that's something that's definitely going to carry over into next year. And a lot of those schools are looking at the State House for maybe some extra funding or some help keeping their feet under them. You know, another thing that was pretty big this year was some future ready Oregon investments. That was $200 million for workforce development, really focused on underserved communities, communities of color, rural communities, women, students who are typically underrepresented in higher education. So I've written a little bit so far about what some of that money is doing. Really, it's being spent all over the place in some really interesting ways. A story that stands out to me was Portland Community College, started a quick turn class for English language learners who want to get welding certificates. So I went out and spent some time with those students as they were welding and learning English at the same time. That money is also being spent on things like expungement clinics that can help students, get past crimes off their record so they'll have a better chance getting into school and then coming out of school finding a job. So that's also a really interesting pot of money.
Lots of money out there.
Lots of money.
Yeah. And Sami, one thing that jumped out to me in your reporting recently in terms of enrollment is that the University of Oregon has passed PSU as the second largest public university in the state. What's driving that? Because that's one that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, the enrollment picture is really interesting. We're seeing really varied trends from school to school. I would say that this year's numbers seem at least a bit more stable than they have been in the past. We saw big drop-offs at community colleges during the pandemic. Our universities, our flagship universities, OSU and University of Oregon, didn't see as much of an impact there. But again, just really varied in each sector. While some of the community colleges have stabilized their enrollment, we've seen the state's largest one, Portland Community College, continue to see pretty big declines in students this fall. On the university front, while University of Oregon and OSU are going gangbusters with enrollment, the small regional universities are not having that same phenomenon. And one of the reasons that Portland State is down in students actually is because it really relies on transfer students, and it's getting fewer transfer students from community colleges. So it's a really mixed picture school to school. Okay.
So yeah, kids aren't going to PCC, then they're not going to PSU. And that's why that might be bearing out in the numbers. Okay. Well, let's look forward, not back. Rose, 2023, what have you got in store? What are you looking at in terms of the major issues on your beat?
Well, I'm really interested in childcare. So during the pandemic, Multnomah County lost 20% of its childcare providers. But this has been an issue long before the pandemic. Most of Oregon is a childcare desert. And next year, I'm hoping to look more into how that affects families and what we are doing, or what can we do about that. The first story that will probably run in my beat next year is about a research-based training for teachers on how to teach reading. For years, we have been teaching reading the wrong way. Emily Hanford at the American Public Media really spearheaded the coverage on this. But we have been telling kids basically to guess at words, what they are based on pictures and syntax, rather than sound them out by each letter, which is what strong readers do. So teachers in school districts are opting into this teacher training to essentially learn how to teach kids to read correctly, which I found very interesting to learn about.
Yeah, as the parent of a kindergartner who is actively learning to read, let me tell you, learning about that podcast, Sold a Story, really kind of blew my mind. So I'm glad you're looking into that. It's such a really important issue for kids and families. So look forward to seeing that coverage. Julia, you kind of already gave a little hints of what you're looking into, but obviously the legislature is meeting down in Salem for a regular session, and there's going to be a new governor. I would imagine there's stuff that you're interested in that fits into that very hot political environment.
Yeah, if Governor-elect Kotek has not named her new deputy superintendent over the Oregon Department of Education by the time this podcast airs, and a listener out there knows who it will be, please let me know. I have heard some names floating around out there, mostly big city. Well, I mean, this is Oregon. So superintendents of larger school districts whose names are in the mix. But I do think it's going to be really interesting to see the direction of the state under Governor-elect Kotek. She signaled early on that she's interested in prioritizing third grade literacy. And I think anybody who's interested in that should read the upcoming story that Rose has coming, which is terrific, about phonics training for teachers. And, the reason they pick third grade is because it's extremely predictive. If you can't read at grade level by the end of third grade, the outcomes are really troubling for you. And unfortunately, this year's third graders are the kids who were in kindergarten when the pandemic started, right?
Yeah.
So they're behind. It's not great. So, and I think the test scores that were released this year, while only one measure of how kids are doing, certainly do bear that out. So I think that literacy in the higher grades will be a focus for me. I just was out in Beaverton yesterday and did an interview with a mom and a son. And I think this story maybe will have run by the time this podcast airs, but the son was, in seventh grade and still reading at a second grade reading level. And his school was just not able to help him. And what his mom wound up doing was, purchasing a phonics tutoring system herself and executing it herself. And that's wonderful that she was able to help her family. And we probably do need more widespread systemic solutions to that, because not every family has that means. This is an equity issue, really. So I look forward to continuing that coverage and reading Rose on the topic well into 2023. And literacy is something that might touch Sami's beat too as we go forward.
Excellent segue, Sami. I was just talking to Sam Swindler earlier, so excuse me.
I'll answer to anything. I think I've found in journalism there are lots of Sams, so Sami at least, helps differentiate between which of us you're hollering at.
There you go.
When I think about next year, I think watching the legislative session is really going to be important for me. We talked a little bit about the funding piece. Community colleges in particular are looking for more funding this year from the legislature. Everybody always wants more money.
Right.
The one really, really important piece, I think, to keep our eye on, both because students really find it important and the State Higher Education Coordinating Commission is really focused on it, is increasing funding for student aid, particularly need-based aid. College just keeps getting more expensive and more out of reach. And Oregon is not among the top states for need-based financial aid. So the HEC is what that body is called, has proposed, like a fourfold funding increase for state need-based financial aid. HEC is pretty clear that it doesn't think that it's going to get all that money in one pass. But, legislators, student advocates, this state body are all hoping to get more money for financial aid next year, which is always a big deal for students. The other thing I'll be looking at in the State House is this last year, there was a task force of state senators and representatives who traveled the state, visiting campuses and talking to underrepresented students about their needs. In early December, they put out a report. It's really a rather sweeping report touching pretty much every corner of higher ed on recommendations. Those are things from examining how the system is working for students with disabilities to increasing financial aid and hiring chief diversity officers, like super sweeping report. So I'll be looking to see if they make any progress on some of those goals this year.
Kind of want to go around the horn again one more time. This has obviously been such a challenging few years, and there's so much concern about behavioral issues and learning loss and staffing shortages and all that stuff. But is there anything on your various beats that give, when we turn the page to a new year, try to think positively, is there anything that gives you hope? Rose, is there anything that you've come across that really gives you hope about where we're headed?
It frankly gives me a lot of hope that we have this team. Julia just started. Our fearless leader, Betsy Hammond, had this idea for an education hub at the Oregonian for a while now, to have 3 reporters covering the full range of education. And that's incredibly important to have that in local media, to hold our education institutions and state government responsible, and give kids what they deserve. When I tell people that I am an early childhood education reporter, often I get the response of surprise. That's so specific. Why would you need that? And often people don't realize that a young child's brain completes 90% of its growth by age 5. So waiting till kindergarten at age 5 to start intervening on developmental delays, socializing kids, that's too late. A lot happens in the first few years of a kid's life. So I think it's really exciting that this team is here and finally together, and I'm really excited for what we'll do next year.
Couldn't have said it better. I mean, that's awesome. Julia, I don't know if you have anything to add or something beyond that gives you hope. You're frozen. I don't know if you're still there.
I will jump in here while we're waiting for Julia. I think it's really encouraging that on the higher ed beat, state leaders are really looking at these questions of equity and access and affordability. That really is the talk among everyone. And so it's encouraging at least that folks are paying attention and trying to move the needle on this issue. I will say on kind of on a smaller scale, one thing that I'm going to plug that, if this podcast runs in early January, the story will be out. But I spent a bit of time reporting on a story that I think is very fun and is slated to run on New Year's Day. So hopefully you will have all seen it at this point. Writing about students at Mount Hood Community College, which has the only program in the state where students can study to be morticians. Our visuals team and I got to go visit the school. We got to watch an embalming and watch students learn with the cadaver. And I think that the story will surprise you about, these students, many of whom are young women who really want to get into this industry to take care of other people as they walk through the process of death and grieving. That
is fascinating. I really look forward to seeing and hearing that. My next door neighbor growing up was a mortician. And one of my first pieces of quote unquote journalism, I guess, like in middle school, I did a profile on him. And I remember, I didn't realize that maybe some people thought that was like an odd profession to have, but it was, he was an important person in my life. So I look forward to reading your piece. And Julia, we lost you there, but you're back now. You got any hope for us for 2023?
I'm a parent. I have twin 8th graders, and I think that this school year has been in many ways an enormous joy. It's the first year since 2020 that feels normal. And yes, I know there's the flu and RSV and lots of kids getting sick, at least at the time of recording. But, there's a harvest festival, and the kids are going to go to their first middle school dance. And there was outdoor school, and there's a science fair, and there's a fun run with popsicles at the end. Although if you're my kid, it's more like a fun stroll. Sorry, Ben, if you're listening to this. And I just feel such joy at those markers of normalcy being back for kids of all ages. And I hope that our team gets to chronicle some of them. I think Sami's embalming story and Rose's Yoncalla preschool story are great markers of that. Sometimes as reporters, we're often looking for, and we should be looking, right, for like hard hitting, here's a problem and here's what can happen to solve it. But I hope that in 2023, we are able to illuminate as well these moments of joy and normalcy.
It's terrific, as we've said multiple times, to have this level of coverage. And I look forward to reading all your stuff in 2023. And thanks for taking time to talk.
Thank you so much.
Sami, you have something you want to add?
I have one more quick thing I just want to inform your listeners of. Keep an eye out this year, 2023, for a new segment of our education coverage. I think we're calling it the Youth Voices segment. We're going to be having high school students from around the metro area, but also some students from farther south. I know we've got some writers in Salem who are going to write news stories for us and personal essays and columns about education and teen life. And so we're really excited to bring you some of that student voice in 2023 as well, and are hoping to publish stories every other week.
Thank you for the reminder. I know we talked about that before hitting record, and then it evaporated from my brain. So more things to look forward to.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. You can find all of our education coverage online at OregonLive.com/education. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find the show. And tell a friend. Help spread the word. The best way to support our journalism and efforts like our education lab is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.